Yeah, when I videotaped myself uh, for something else with this webcam, I realized that I have these books in the background, and then it's like, oh, okay, I didn't really intend that, but you know how all these people like to put books in the background to try to make themselves look
It
smart.
works. It works. Yeah, it's good.
It was unintentional here, anyways, but
So we are live. I'm here with my friend Kevin Mark. Kevin, how are you doing?
very well, thank you.
You're
How are you
looking
doing, David?
you're looking very intellectual with all those books. I'm just joking.
Yeah, there we go. Good.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm
Except
kidding.
most of them are kids' books, but I shouldn't have said that, I guess.
Well, you need to start somewhere. So
Yeah, there we go.
start with the
Exactly.
ABCs and the coloring books and
That's right.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're looking thin. Have you been losing weight?
Yeah, I have actually. I've been going to the gym a bit and trying to lose some
Ah.
weight.
Well,
So
you were
it's,
never overweight. You were just, normal.
well, I never really looked at, because in my family, it's like when you gain weight, you just kind of gain a pot belly, but your arms and legs stay skinny. Uh, but at any rate, I stepped on the scale and it seemed too high. So my wife, Amanda, has been working out. So she convinced me to go to the gym with her. So seems to be working pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. What about your diet? What are you doing differently?
So I'm currently eating about 1,700 calories a day. And she's counting my macros. So that's like protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And so it's like I'm supposed to keep it to certain percentages. Um, so I kind of just, for the most part, eat food that she prepares for me anyways. So she's able to just kind of give me whatever is going to fit that diet. And, she makes good food, so I can't complain.
Whoa. Yeah, well, it seems to be working. And your energy, so your energy levels, you've noticed you have more, or you weren't, like, it wasn't a problem anyway before, right? Your energy levels?
Yeah, it wasn't really a problem before, but I would say it is a little better than it was before. I would say before I was getting maybe a little more tired easier. So it does seem to be helping, uh, exercising. Because in the summer, I would ride my bike to work. I know you ride your bike everywhere pretty much, right?
Yeah.
And do you do that all winter as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I just kind of quit in winter, but I need to get a bike that, has studs in the tires or something,
Yeah.
because then I could do it in winter.
Are you in a snowy state? You said you're in the
I am,
northern
yes.
state, right? A northern state?
Yes, I'm in North Dakota, so it is very. In fact, the weather is actually, in many ways, uh, crazier in the winter than where I was in Manitoba, because you get these storms coming through and just crazy winds and stuff. Even though the temperature isn't quite as bad, it's a little windier. So, like this whole weekend, it's a kind of a on the verge of a blizzard outside.
Wow, I didn't know that the Americans had to suffer through this stuff, the snow and all that. It's horrible.
Yeah, apparently North Dakota is the second coldest state next to Alaska. So
Oh boy.
yeah,
Next move, Alaska, then. You can go to
there, yeah,
Alaska.
yeah, maybe.
So the last time we talked about young Earth creationism, so called, and geocentrism and stuff like that. Today I want to talk a little bit more about traditionalism, SSPX, and all that sort of thing, because he hinted to me that you've been attending an SSPX parish from time to time, or is that a regular thing, or what's happening there?
Yeah, so I often do attend an SSPX chapel. I mean, it's not like it's some sort of exclusive thing. Like, I mean, I still go to my local Novus Ordo parish from time to time, but I certainly do um, think that the traditional Latin Mass gives more glory to God, and as such,
Yeah.
I think it's important to attend there. And in addition, it's partly for my kids' sake to try to bring them up in a environment that is uh, Catholic and not one where kind of the faith is watered down.
Yeah. Speaking of watered down faith, did you hear the German synod went ahead with blessing same-sex unions?
No, I didn't.
I
Wow.
think that news broke today, if I'm not mistaken. I don't follow the news, but that made it onto my radar
Yeah.
just before I got online with you, actually. So I don't know if it's true. You can confirm it. Check it out. I don't like to follow Catholic news because it's too depressing. But
Yes.
yeah,
I hear you.
you know, I'd rather just wait a couple hundred years and find out who the good guys and the bad guys were.
Yeah, well, there you go. And that very well may happen. There may be condemnations and vindications that come out at some point.
It's scary watching the sausage getting made, but it's nice looking back at the delicatessen, the front of the house, the front of the shop. It's a beautiful delicatessen, but when you see the sausage being made, it's like, oh no, no.
Yeah, that's right.
I have a friend. I just met a new friend at work, and he's a new employee where I work. And he said he got a job part time, well, just for a short time, at this pork production place, like a farm where they slaughter the cows or the pigs. And his job was to take a scimitar and to slit the throats of the cute innocent pigs. And he said it was just disgusting and foul, and he felt bad for the pigs because it's hard to kill them properly the first time, so they have to sort of give it a second go with a
Mm.
pistol to the head. And so he no longer eats pork. So this is sort of just in line with the imagery of watching the sausage get made. Like, it is disgusting, and he will no longer eat pork. So that's how powerful it is. But if you go to the grocery store and you get a nice cut of pork and you fry it up, it seems pretty tasty, and it doesn't seem disgusting, right? I don't know if you eat meat, but
I'm I'm trying to just determine if at this point we're still going with an analogy of
yeah,
the Catholic
yeah,
Church or
yeah. Crazy times we're living in. I mean,
Yeah, right.
someone recently, one of my guests recently said that it's not fair to talk about the fourth century with the Arians, that this is a much worse time that we're living in. Would you agree with that? And I'm not sure what his reasons were. He may have mentioned it, but I don't recall. But would you agree that the Aryan thing, it's not a fair comparison because today we have just so much more perversion and license and stuff like that?
Um, well, in some ways, I think you can draw comparisons, but if you're looking at um, analyzing which one is a worse crisis, in my opinion, the one now is because yes, we're not just talking about one issue, one doctrinal issue, which really was what the Arianism crisis was. We're talking about modernism now, which Pope Pius X called the synthesis of all heresies. So we have one heresy after another, and they're all kind of building, and um, it seems to be largely rooted in this concept that the idea that the church can evolve, because it would seem that all of the prelates in favor of these heresies all think they can slowly change doctrine into something that it never was, because they think that this is God's way of doing things, this evolutionary mindset. So, yeah, I definitely feel that this is a far worse situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's scary when a so-called Christian believes in any form of evolution. I just find that depressing, frankly. Is there any solid proof that Pope Francis believes in or is favorable to any form of evolution?
Yes, he's made statements in favor of evolutionary theory in the past. And so I have no doubt that he is an evolutionist, biological and otherwise.
Okay. And I don't know how you would know this, but do you have a hunch at least about the percentage of bishops that worldwide that are creationists? Like, is there 1%, 2%, 10%?
That is a very good question. It's I think it varies somewhat based upon the region that you're talking about. Because, for instance, in Africa, way more bishops and priests are creationists than in the West. So I'm not really sure exactly what it is, but in polls that have been done of Catholics in America, generally about 25% are creationists. And so I suspect it's less than that with the bishops, because in seminaries, they basically teach that evolutionism is no problem. So it's probably um, less than 10%, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I remember, when I go to a new chapel or parish or a Catholic church, I am always watching and listening for any indication about any sort of error, but in particular, it's easy to catch the ones about evolution. And one of my uh, priests that I had grown to like, he just slipped into a sermon or whatever you call it. The what do we call it in the Catholic Church? The talk they give.
Homily.
Yeah, the homily. He slipped it in about some crustaceans and how they're millions of years old and they evolved and whatever. And it's just like I couldn't help it but lose a little bit of respect for him. And I feel bad. I feel bad. I don't want to judge anyone. I don't want to feel superior to anyone or whatever, or think myself superior to anyone just because I have the grace to believe in special fiat creation, right? So, how do you deal with that, like that feeling of superiority or the thought that maybe you're superior because you have the grace to believe in fiat creation?
Um, I don't think, I mean, personally, at least I don't think that I've ever thought of it in any type of prideful way. I think you just have to think of it in much the same way as other graces that God has had the benevolence to bestow upon us. Like, for instance, the gift of faith itself, and the gift of being in the Catholic Church. These are gifts that we highly value, and we value them to the point that we want others to come to this knowledge because it's so important. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I should have grabbed him after the service and talked to him, but I wouldn't know how to begin really. I guess I could talk about the millions of years of disease and death and thorns and thistles before Adam and Eve came on the scene. That would put him in a pretty awkward situation, right?
Yes, that is a very effective way of looking at it, because when you bring otherwise this idea of creation versus evolution is can seem to a lot of people like it's kind of an abstract thought that doesn't really matter. But when you bring that idea in, that God is the author of death, and this world of death we live in now is his design from the beginning, according to the evolutionary view, that really does say something about the character of God that isn't consistent with the God we know and love. So I think once you bring that home to someone, they're forced to have to try to deal with things in a way that they maybe didn't before.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of creationism, I just caught the beginning of your recent debate. Can you talk us through like how you think it went? It seemed to be going well from what little I did see. Were there any highlights, like anything surprising? Did you do a good job? Did the other guy do a good job? And did you learn anything? Did he learn anything
Uh,
from you?
yeah. So
Who
I
was he,
thought
by the
it
way?
went very. Sorry, say that again.
Who was the gentleman you were debating?
Okay, so his name was Dr. Doug Darnowski, and he is a Catholic professor. And so he is definitely a committed theistic evolutionist. And he does. he's involved in I'm not exactly sure what it is, some sort of Catholic online school, but he teaches evolution, and he teaches it as a fact. And so I had written into Crisis Magazine, basically writing a rebuttal to an argument that he had, or an essay that he had written into them. And then it ended up that the host of Crisis Magazine, Eric Sammons, just asked if we would be willing to do a debate. So
Hmm.
um, I said sure, and yeah, I thought it went very well. I mean, if you read the comments, most of them are very favorable to the creation position. So, and I think part of that was the fact that the debate was specifically geared towards the idea of defending this from a Catholic point of view. So it wasn't so much going into the scientific nuances. And quite frankly, he had virtually no um, defense of his position from a Catholic point of view. It was very weak, while there is a great deal of um, very strong arguments from scripture tradition and magisterial rulings, authoritative ones, that are highly in favor of the creation position. So it seems like it went very well.
Cool. And what about the moderator guy? Was he fair?
Oh yeah, he was very fair, and he said that going into it, he kind of didn't really have an opinion one way or another. He said, depending on what argument he hears on a particular day, he
Yeah.
sways one way or the other. So he didn't really say, he didn't declare a winner or anything, but I certainly hope that it had an effect on him, and maybe um, he'll be willing to entertain the creationist ideas more going into the future.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a little bit disappointed with the world, the non-Catholic world. I'm a little bit disappointed, frankly, with Satan himself, that there isn't a better argument against Catholicism generally. And if you want to use creationism as an example, there are no good arguments against creationism. Um, so I'm a little bit disappointed to find myself in this embarrassing situation where I'm complacent because I'm in the safety of the ark, and without the ark everyone is doomed. So that's why we invite them in, because there's always hope until that last breath that people can convert. And it's the same thing with any of the doctrines that are controversial in the Catholic Church. Like, they're not controversial to me, and so I have a certain complacency because I'm not torn by these strong arguments from without the church. I'm just completely complacent and happy with the wisdom and the the truth that we have access to in the church. It's like overwhelming to me. I wonder if other people feel the same way. Like, if you talk to a Scientologist, would he say the exact same thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is one religion I know very little about, to be honest.
Religion. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Or, any, like the Mormons, that's another silly satanic worldview. The Mormons, nice people, don't get me wrong, nice people, but their metaphysics is just as bad as the Scientologists. You know, so it just makes me wonder, like, we all believe what we believe, and I always preach against mediocrity. I don't preach against non-Catholic worldviews. I preach against mediocrity, because if you're in a non-Catholic worldview, if you dive into it, you examine it, you learn about it, you question it, and you try to discover if it's coherent or not, then you will end up modifying your worldview. I don't know how many times, but eventually, if you keep pressing with that attitude, you will end up, if you're skeptical enough and you persist in your skepticism, you will end up Catholic. That's my heartfelt belief. You share that opinion?
I do. Yes. I mean, I, my conversion to the faith was one in which I in no way wanted to become Catholic. I was seeking the truth, and I kept seeking and reading more and learning about the early Christian faith. And when I came up to the point where if I could see where this was heading, I didn't like it. I hated the idea. The last thing I wanted to do was become Catholic, but I had no choice because that's where the truth led. And now, of course, that I am Catholic, I'm very thankful for it and glad that I am, um, even though it certainly is the case with the crisis in the faith. There are aspects of it that make you shake your head and want to bury your head in your hands at times when looking at fellow Catholics. Unfortunately, it's something that, yeah, I again, I wasn't looking for it, but that's where the truth led. And if the truth is the truth, it's not just my truth. So everyone is going to find that truth because the Lord is going to lead them if He allows them to.
Well, I've got a good friend here in the live chat. His name's Daniel Drazinovich, and he told me that his wife is an old earther, and they haven't really, I don't think, hashed it out like with a big philosophical battle or anything like that. That's not appropriate in a marriage, probably. But he just sort of posed the question to her, and she said she's an old earther. So um, I don't want to get in between husband and wife here, but do you have any tips for in terms of sort of like some starting points of where he could suggest maybe some reading to her? I know the Colby Center and these sorts of things might be good. They've got a lot of books. I've got a lot of their books.
Yeah,
Or just in terms of conversation too, like just conversation starters and stuff like that without being annoying.
right. Well, to me, the most definitive way to uh, show someone the the truth of creation in terms of young Earth creation is the Foundation's Restored video series that the Colby Center has. I mean, Hugh Owen has told me that he is not aware of a single person who has watched that series from start to the end that hasn't fully embraced the traditional Catholic doctrine of creation.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's a pretty good record. Having said that, you have to be willing to get through, what is it, 18 hours worth of content. So it is a commitment, but that would be the definitive way. But not everyone's going to be willing to do that. So besides that, I would say part of it, to me at least, is the fact that I went through a lot of sciences, and I guess I could see that these sciences, well, presented to the layman as definitive, as factual, as kind of set in stone, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, these are hypotheses and theories that are always in flux. And that is the opposite of what Catholicism is, where we have these truths that are immutable. So to me, when you stop looking at this as some sort of scientific investigation of origins that we must then somehow um, blend with the faith, and instead realize that all of the fathers of the church considered this a faith issue first and foremost, period, then all of a sudden it just comes into play. Okay, why can't I believe that this was just fiat creation? God commanded and it came forth. He spoke and it was made. I mean, that is the most simple explanation. All children could easily believe in that. And that's what all Catholics and Christians did believe until we started elevating science to this position where it has now superseded theology in the minds of most men.
I did watch that series. It's 18 parts, he said.
I think it's actually not 18 parts, but it's 18 hours worth.
Oh,
It's,
okay.
I think,
13 parts or something.
13 or so parts.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I did watch it because Hugh Owen was kind enough to gift it to me when I came out of the closet as a young Earth creationist years ago. So
Yeah.
I think maybe you had a hand in that too. I don't know, but it was the Colby Center. So
Yes.
so thank you for that. And he's a sweet, saintly man. Do you still get to see him?
I do. Yes. I see him occasionally. I'm in email contact with him a lot
Yeah,
because I'm involved with the Kolbe Center. So we do communicate frequently. Yes.
nice, nice man. And he's another one with a big family, so that's always nice to see.
He is. Yes. He has outdone me so far. He has 9 children. So, yeah.
And you have another one on the way.
I do have another one on the way. Yes. So that will be 8.
Number.
That'll be number 8.
Okay, well maybe it's triplets, so you'll pull ahead.
You never know. Yes.
Has your wife had any twins at all?
No, but we do have twin nieces,
Oh,
so it is
it's in the
in
family.
her family.
Ah, that's pretty exciting. So, when I did watch when I did watch that video series, it hinted at the fact of, it talked a lot about Rene Descartes and his bad influence on the course of history. So I wanted to ask you if you're aware of the fact that he deprived us almost single-handedly of, I think, two of Aristotle's two of the 4 types of causality. We have today, we do talk about the efficient cause and these sorts of things, but he got rid of the final cause, which is like the first and most important one. I can't recall if that was mentioned in the video, but Descartes did away with 2 very essential metaphysical categories of causality. Can you talk about that at all? Are you aware of that? Was it mentioned in the video?
I'm not aware of that. I would be happy to have you tell me about that if you know about it.
That's about all I know. It's a vague. I only have a vague grasp on the 4 types of causality, but there's formal cause, efficient cause, final cause, and what's the 4th one? I could look it up here. I should know. Material cause. Material cause. So yeah, I think that modern science is all about material cause and efficient cause, and the formal cause and the final causality have been jettisoned. If I'm not mistaken, don't take my word for it, but something like
Sure.
that. But I'm pretty sure I can almost guarantee that at least the final causality was jettisoned, because that has to do with teleology, or the ends of things. And without that, because I always think about reasoning. Good reasoning is circular reasoning, because it comes from God, who is all, and it goes out into the creation and it comes back to God. Like, we ourselves come from God and we're destined for God. So that's sort of like a circularity that I see with, because I'm very prone to monism, I believe. And it's interesting, I was just reading on the Catholic Encyclopedia about monism, how there's a sort of a healthy Catholic monism that we can talk about, where God is the all in all, and creation by comparison is nothing. So really it's a form of monism, but we also subscribe to creation, that it is a separate thing. And of course there's matter and spirit. So I was reading about this when I was looking up dualism for my friend Daniel Drazinovich, who's in the live chat now. He was asking me about dualism, so I just looked it up in the Catholic Encyclopedia. And so there's this idea that God is all in all. He's the source of everything. He's the destination of the rational creatures that he created. And so I'm very sympathetic to monism. I always have been, and the religions and the philosophies of the East focus on monism. There's only one thing, the one mind of God. And for the East, they often go the way of like Gnosticism, spirit good, matter evil, and matter is just illusion, and separation is illusion, and all these sorts of things. So it all ties in ties in with this concept. But the reason I'm talking about dualism, the reason I'm talking about monism, is because of the final causality. The final causality, it sounds like the last thing, but the last thing is the first thing. The first thing being, of course, God. And the human nature, for example, in the case of humans, God bestowed us with a human nature, and that nature was designed with a purpose, and there's an end in goal, a goal in mind, and to deny that not only undermines the natural sciences, and we can see what a mess it is today with the LGBTQ and redefinition of marriage, redefinition of man and women. We can see what a definition, what a disaster it is in that regard. But think about the spiritual realm. Think about how it's undermining our Catholic faith and the bishops going astray, like we were just touching on earlier.
Mhm.
So it really is devastating to jettison the final causality, I would say.
Yes,
It's
I
really
agree.
powerful. It's a very powerful. People think that philosophy, metaphysics aren't important topics and that they're just theoretical, but they have implications, and those implications actually do play out, right, in society.
Yes.
So it's all about education. So what is the age range of your kids? Because I'm going to start asking you about the education of your kids next.
Sure. So our oldest is 13, soon to be 14, and our youngest is 2. And so we have approximately 2 years between uh, most of them.
Yeah, yeah. So if you encounter some worldliness in your children, this is the focus of my topic about education with you. If you encounter some worldliness, they start buying into the world, and they're a bit young for that now. But at 14, that's when I really started. So maybe you should buckle up for the coming years here. But if you have encountered it, or if you will in the future, what's your tactic to not scare them away? Because I've talked to a lot of religious people whose kids were scared away by the fire and brimstone. The stories about God's judgment and hell. And when I say stories, I mean they're true stories, but a lot of people want to reject them because they want to make it into nothing but a story, so they can run away from this idea of an eternal punishment, right? So how would you navigate that minefield where you want to keep them in the faith, but you don't want to scare them, but you want them to be free, but you also want to have influence without controlling them? It's how would you
Yeah.
deal with that?
Yeah. Sometimes that can be a very difficult thing. I mean, one thing that kind of came to mind as you were mentioning that is um, before the COVID mania, we used to often go down to uh, this small town across the border into the States, because we used to live very close to the border when we lived in Canada. And we would go to this mass there, and there was a really good priest, and he asked the boys if they would do altar serving. And so they agreed, and they kind of just reluctantly agreed, and they really didn't like it. Like they actually hated it. Like they did not want to go. They I kept encouraging them and whatnot, but they were always very nervous. And to their credit, they did kind of get thrown into it
Yeah,
when they weren't really totally prepared for it.
yeah,
So, anyways, when we came here and we started going to the traditional Latin Mass, I mean, altar serving is way more difficult in the traditional Mass. I mean, you need to know Latin responses. It's almost military precision in terms of what you have to do and what you have to know on cue. And so they needed altar servers, because in the Novus Ordo masses, it's almost like a unnecessary decoration to
yeah,
have altar servers, but the traditional mass, it's necessary. So, anyways, so I was encouraging them. I was like, you know what? Like I said to them, I'm not going to force you to do this. But they kept, were getting people to ask them occasionally, will you come to altar server practice? And eventually, well, I just told my oldest just pray about it. And he he said he did. He said he was, but then he said he's still struggling about it. And then he says kind of like, well, what do you think I should do? And then I said, I think you should just do it. I think you're going to find if you just go into it and do it, you're actually going to, it's going to be good. And so he still didn't really want to, but he thankfully he took my advice without me having to force him to do it. And I would say I kind of strongly encouraged him, but didn't actually force him. But they started going to these practices, and now both him and my second oldest son say that they love it. They say that before they started doing altar serving in the Latin Mass, they didn't even really like going to the Latin Mass. And now they feel like all of a sudden it's like a switch has flipped, that now they're involved in this really important thing that they get, things have just kind of all of a sudden clicked, and they said they really like going to it. So that has just been such a huge blessing. And I guess it just kind of teaches me that one, yeah, you can strongly encourage, and sometimes you have to force things, but in general, you are best not actually, forcing something on someone, even though you can kind of help them along the way. And then secondly, that God is faithful, that if we keep them pointed towards the truth of God and the Catholic Church, that he is going to be with them and guide them and help them along the way. And I'm hopeful that that is going to allow them to not have to go off the rails like so many have done and have to come back.
Now for thank you for that. Now for a hypothetical question, a very scary question that's it's one of my fears, one of my deep-seated fears with the whole Rad-Trad SSPX movement. And I know you're not fully fledged into that, but your kids are being exposed to it. One of my fears is that your kids will turn on the Vicar of Christ. So are you gonna stand for that, or are you gonna stand up for the Vicar of Christ when the time comes?
Well, I mean, of course, being Catholic necessitates an allegiance to the Pope. So to me, if you want to, run out into some sort of um, bizarre offshoot of Catholicism where you want to rule things without a Pope, then to me, that's not even Catholic. So, and I think that the kids um, know that. But it is true that in today's day and age, that is a valid concern, because with the Pope currently, Pope Francis being so unorthodox that you have to question whether he is actually Catholic. It's quite, I can see why anybody in their right mind would be at least confused as to the current state of affairs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you know, my my problem is okay, like because there are two issues here. There are two issues here, and this is not about you. This is about just the Rad-Trads. Okay, my issue is because there are two things. One is who is the Pope? Whether he's good or bad is a separate question. But who is the Pope? And the Church today teaches infallibly that it's Bergoglio, right? That's Pope Francis, right? So that's the first issue. I think that's pretty easy to sort out who the Pope is. Who does the Church say that the Pope is? The Church says that it's Pope Francis. Okay, that's the first point. The second aspect of this is how do we speak about the Vicar of Christ in public, on the internet, from the pulpit, whatever. How do we speak about him? And this is my main gripe. My main gripe is there is disrespect. If I go in the comment section of any right leaning Catholic online stuff, it's Bergoglio this, Bergoglio that, and he's the Antichrist, and he's homosexual, he's communist, whatever. It's no holds barred, and it's anything but respectful language. And I mean, it's the norm. It's not the exception. It's the norm in the right wing. So that's what outrages me. That's what annoys me. And I hope you share my concern there, right?
Yeah, I mean, what we have now is a complete inversion to what was the case however many decades ago, where such sentiments would never be expressed publicly against the Pope. And now, like you said, it's just very commonplace. Having said that, it is a very difficult situation that we're in here because I mean, you can the danger I think in going full fledged to the concept of covering over naked Noah in his drunkenness in terms of the Pope is to do what the bishops and cardinals did with the pedophilia scandals, for instance. I mean, if you keep sweeping things under the rug and pretending that these issues aren't here, not being willing to talk about these things openly and call a spade, we I'm just not sure that that is always the right way to go.
For sure, yeah. I want to give a shout out to my friend Pychris. He's in the live chat here. I'm just inviting him to come back because it's been a while since he was on. He's been toying with, he was a Satanist actually when I met him, but he's now toying with different ideas and pretty sure he's dabbling with Christianity. He's got some Methodist roots, I think, from what I understand.
Okay.
So it's always interesting following the journeys of different, my guests, how they go through their faith journey. So shout out to Pychris. But yeah, certainly when it comes to the difficult times that we're living in the church, and our attitude towards the Vicar of Christ, and I call him that to emphasize how much dignity his office has, and to emphasize also that it's he is just a human in that office. He is a frail human and he's subject to error. And we all know, those of us who are well catechized know how limited the charism of infallibility is. So we don't need to pretend that every opinion he has is wonderful. No, I disagree with him about evolution. I disagree with him about the jab. I disagree with him probably about many things. I think we agree on Lionel Messi that he's one of the greatest soccer players ever. But we disagree about all kinds of other stuff. But there, in terms of his Christianity, I'm inspired by his progressive liberal, whatever it is. I do like progressive liberal popes. Like I like John the 23rd. Do you know much about John the 23rd?
I'm probably not an expert on him. No,
But you have any impression of him?
I have not read good things about him. No.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Like I have a soft spot in my heart for all the liberal popes. Okay, so he was a liberal pope, and he touches me. And was he shocking and unorthodox? Probably. I mean, he called the Second Vatican Council, right? And so he probably has many, many enemies. But if I'm not mistaken, I think he's been canonized. Is that the case?
He has, yes.
Yeah. And do you accept that as an infallible?
I do not. No.
Oh, really? Oh, really? Oh, do you reject St. John Paul II as a saint too?
I have my doubts about that.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
Yes. And Paul VI.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yes.
Wow. But you've read some really good stuff from Paul VI, especially on contraception, right?
Yes. However, to be honest, I think Humanae Vitae was severely lacking.
Okay.
It really did not get to the heart of the matter at all in terms of what I see now amongst many Catholics is this kind of adherence to the letter of the law, where they say, okay, we recognize contraception is not allowed by the church, but um, and so they will, perform natural family planning, so to speak, in a way that with a contraceptive mentality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And um, if he would have taught instead of with all that excess verbiage, that he would instead have said, just trust God. This is a very simple situation. God has given you your wife or your husband as the one of the greatest earthly blessings you will ever receive, and all you have to do is do what comes naturally and trust God for the fecundity that will come out of your marriage, because all of your children will be the greatest blessings you could ever imagine, one after another after that. And God is the God of all creation. Of course he will provide for you as he needs, as you need. So if he had just instead phrase things in that way, trust God no matter what, no matter how bad it gets, no matter how difficult, just trust God, as Catholics have done all the way back to Christ in history. I think all of a sudden you would have this complete transformation in the Catholic world, because you can't hold on to material wealth when you have lots of kids. You can't you can't hold on to your pet um, sports or your vacations or all of this other materialism. It all goes by the wayside. It's the perfect solution to the materialism we find ourselves in. And it not only that, we'd be populating the world um, with Catholics.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I
Yeah.
think his that was lacking. Having said that, of course, I'm glad that he didn't just go ahead and say, "Oh yeah, just start using contraception at will."
Well, he was outnumbered by his bishops when he reached out for advice, right? So
Yes,
when I first entered the church or was preparing to enter the church, I read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the new one, the 1995 or whatever it is, and my very progressive liberal homosexual friend who identifies as Catholic, um, and we're unfortunately no longer friends because he when I became Catholic I sort of started speaking out against his sexuality. But in any case, he said, "Oh, did you read anything in there that you didn't agree with?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What?" And I don't know what he was expecting me to say, but I said, "NFP, the natural family planning. Like I just find that is too progressive for me." And he
right,
was laughing. He's like, "That's what you object to." He thought I would find some of the conservative stuff objectionable, but it was like I do remember distinctly being disappointed that that the church was so progressive and liberal as to allow for NFP. But I've since come to understand that the church is very, very gentle with humans, Catholics and non-Catholics alike, and that it's all with a view to sweetening the pot, so to speak, or just honey works better than vinegar, or whatever way you want to phrase it. And there is probably a Catholic way of using NFP that's not contraceptive, like what you said, right? Like a lot of people abuse it, probably, and it just seems like a loophole. And the enemies of the church can look at that and laugh at us and just say we're hypocrites, right?
right, yeah. And I mean, and another analogy along those lines is just um, the version of Catholic divorce that is handed out as annulments nowadays.
Yeah,
I mean, if
yeah,
it's the same sort of thing. It's like having it's a type of compromise, if you ask me. I mean, yes, okay, there may be very limited exceptions where those things can be allowed, but if you start um, making them not exceptions but the rule, well, then there's a problem.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I'm going to change topics a little bit here. I'm not going to take too much of your time. We're approaching an hour, but I do want to talk about this. This is a controversial topic, completely nothing to do with what we've been talking about so far, okay? But I want your opinion. Christine Anderson came to Montreal, and my wife went and saw her when she was on her last leg here in Montreal, last leg of the trip. And she got into hot water for saying Islam's not a religion, it's just a political thing and whatever. So I strongly disagree with the Rad-Trads who say we don't worship the same God as the Muslims, we don't worship the same God as the Jews. I strongly disagree. Just using, you know, the natural light of reason and philosophy and classical theism, I strongly disagree with that. Now, it also happens to be the case that in the Catechism, it tells me that we worship the same God. The monotheists all worship the same God. So I really don't understand. I really don't understand the Rad-Trads. And I know you're not a Rad-Trad, but you're closer to the Rad-Trad camp than I am. Okay. So what is it with Islam in particular? Never mind Judaism, because Judaism has a closer relationship with Christianity, obviously. But Islam, I love the Muslims. I admit that it's a false religion, obviously. I admit that they don't understand who or what God is in many ways that are very essential, very, very important. But they know, right. I've read the Muslim philosophers of the Middle Ages. They got it. They understood the uncaused first cause, and they understood the divine attributes, and they understood many of the things which are essential, and so it puts them firmly in that monotheist camp, without a doubt. What do you say?
I would say that they certainly would be considered monotheists. However, firstly, when it comes to the Jews, I mean, it's obvious that they are at least attempting to worship the same God that we are, although they don't have the knowledge of the Holy Trinity.
Yeah.
When it comes to Islam, however, again, the lack of the Holy Trinity and their aversion to that does make me, and the fact that there are obviously significant differences between Islam and Christianity, it does make me question whether they're actually worshiping the same God or not. I mean, it seems to me that the God that they're worshiping seems so utterly different in terms of their conception of
Yeah,
him.
for
It's
sure.
hard for me to envision him being the same God.
Yeah. Yeah. They've misunderstood quite dramatically. And, you know, I don't know if you've read the Regensburg Address by Pope Benedict XVI. Have you encountered that? It's a very short
No.
document. It's a very short document, very famous, infamous, actually, because he lumps in together the Protestants and the Muslims in their fideism based on, you know, a sort of a philosophical misunderstanding of God and of metaphysics, frankly, because he talks about Immanuel Kant and you know, the split between the phenomenal world and the noumenal world. The phenomenal is what we experience, the noumenal is what we can never access, and this is what Kant said famously. And so Pope Benedict XVI, he addressed that head on and without apology, and he basically said that you're stuck in fideism. You can't use your reason to access the faith, and vice versa. They're divorced, and that, I think, is an excellent diagnosis that helps us to understand all the symptoms that are within the Protestant Christian communities and within Islam. And the almost, well, in Islam, I think that we can safely say that they have a transcendent God, but one that is not immanent. And that, so then there's another break. The Protestants, they're all over the map, so they can believe all kinds of things about God, which brings me to my next aspect of the question, which is, you know, I would say to the Rad-Trads, I mean, I'm sure you're more on my side on this for sure, but I would say to the Rad-Trads, do the Protestants even worship the same God? Because you seem to have a very strict, not you, but these Rad-Trads seem to have a very strict definition where you have to understand everything about God, everything that the Catholic Church teaches about God in order to be worshiping that God. So I strongly, strongly disagree. I think the Protestants worship the same God, although imperfectly and with misunderstandings, and the same thing
Right.
for the Jews and the Muslims. So you're pretty much on the same page with me.
Oh yeah, certainly when it comes to Protestants, I mean, being a former Protestant, I have no doubt that I was worshiping the same God. I mean, especially just the fact that the most Protestants, at least, retain virtually identical doctrine of the Holy Trinity, um, leaves you kind of very much the same in that way. I mean, so yeah, I think that there is a certain uh, kind of feeling of animosity towards Protestants among some, if you want to call them Rad-Trads, that's fine. And I think that that's not a good feeling to have, animosity towards others. I mean, I think it's, you tend to get more flies with honey than vinegar.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um, there was I think it was an Orthodox monk, if I'm not mistaken, recently who made it onto my radar because he converted to Islam. So I was talking with a friend. I'm not sure if it was on or off the podcast, but I was talking with a friend about this case. And my perspective, and I want to get your perspective, my perspective is it was a step in the right direction. Now, it's a very counterintuitive argument that I'm making here, but if I flesh it out for you, you'll understand what I'm saying. We talked earlier about how I think mediocrity is the true enemy, right? And I think if you are an Orthodox monk or preacher or whatever you are, and you end up converting to Islam, that tells me that you were not in love with Christ. You were lukewarm in your Christianity, and now you're on fire for Allah, God, and that's a step up. You're improving. You're moving up in the world. Your faith journey is getting more intense. It's better. That's my diagnosis. Because you can't be in love with Jesus Christ and the Trinity and then downgrade to Islam. You just can't do that. It's impossible, right? So a lot of people are outraged by this conversion, but I see it as a step in the right direction. And I wish that a lot of our wolves in sheep's clothing in the Catholic Church, in the pews and on the pulpit and in the Vatican, would do the same thing, fall in love with God, become a Muslim or a Jew, and that's a step in the right direction. And then eventually they can come into the fullness of the faith, which is the Catholic faith. But right now they're not really Catholic, right? So I'm not saying this to put anyone down who is lukewarm, but God himself is going to spit them out of his mouth. You have to be hot or cold.
Yeah, I mean, I think the danger, though, in saying what you said is that since Islam is clearly a false religion, then you, in many ways, moving towards it is moving towards Satan.
Yeah, but they're going from a lukewarm Satanism to a hot Satanism. They can, at least they're on fire, and then they can examine it, and then they can approach the truth. This is how I feel. I could be wrong, of course I could be wrong, but I think that Vatican II does a good job of talking about how God has a plan for everyone who's outside of the visible boundaries of the church, and that plan is to bring them in to the church, right? So
True,
that's exciting.
but what about the idea that um, such a person, even if he's lukewarm, um, is still able to hear Catholic messages and he has access to the sacraments. And so, as such, you would certainly think that it would be easier for him to come closer to God within those confines than within the confines of a false religion where he's going to be hearing a great deal of falsities. In addition, I'm just imagining the end of his life when he's on his deathbed and um, the Lord has showed such mercy that we can even be saved even by confessing with imperfect contrition if
Yeah.
we go to a priest. While in his current situation, he would need perfect contrition to be saved.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Point taken. Okay. Very good. Very good. It makes me think about Luther. Was it good or bad that he revolted? And I'm thinking from my perspective, before you chastise me lovingly, from my perspective, I was thinking it's better that he revolted because he's following his heart and he's on fire. I've read some of the writings of Luther and he was on fire for Jesus Christ. But now having heard what you said, it makes me think, you know, maybe some of these people really are instruments of Satan and they really are enemies of God. I don't want to judge the heart, of course, but since we're on the topic, maybe even staying within this context of like staying in the safety of the ark, leaving the ark, and with the hope of finding a way back. What would you say about Luther? Just talk about Luther and what impression you have of his state of his soul at his death.
Sure. I think anyone who was the author of such heresies and schisms in the church that is really the father of 33 plus thousand denominations now, is had to have been hand in hand with the devil, because that the devil is all about heresies and schism. So he wants to divide the bride of Christ. He wants to break up the unity of the church. And so I can't in any way see how anyone ought to align himself with someone who so clearly was the father of such evil.
My friend Daniel's asking, is Satan entirely subordinate to God? I said yes. What do you say?
Yes.
Pretty easy question. Because otherwise, he's his equal or is superior to God. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean that you might have to qualify that, however, because that might give some people the impression that um, he does
the will of God.
exactly what God wants him to do,
Yeah,
and you have to think about what the wills of
yeah.
God and whatnot.
Permissive
But
will versus positive will.
right.
But I do emphasize often, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I do emphasize often that Satan is doing God's work, and nothing that Satan does is done without explicit permission from God, right?
Yes, I think that can be said. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there is, there are the four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell, and each one of us humans gets to choose, right? We get to choose if we want heaven or hell, and we can strive. We can strive for heaven. Do people strive for hell? I don't know. I don't know if people strive for hell, if they just coast into hell.
I think it's possible some Satanists may do that.
Well, have you read? I'm sure you've read The Imitation of Christ.
Yes,
Did you enjoy it?
I did. Yes.
He says in there that one of the most memorable things that stuck with me. He said that the enemies of God are working harder for death than we Catholics are working for life. So they're working harder for death than we are for life. And it's a humbling meditation. It really is a humbling meditation. If you just flip on the news and you watch what the minions of Satan are up to and how fervently they're working tirelessly to push their agendas, it does seem like they are working harder. They're putting in more man hours and they're really pumped, and they even have like drugs that will help them to stay up later and to work harder.
Sure. Yeah, there's something to that. His burden
Scary.
is easy, his yoke is light.
Yeah. Yeah, so you sleep pretty well at night knowing you're not on Satan's team?
Yeah, you could say that.
You've never dabbled with the dark side though, right? So you don't know what I'm talking about.
Um, well, no, I mean, I certainly have been involved in wicked sin.
Okay.
And so I am fully aware how evil uh, the devil is and how evil humanity is as a result of leaving God and following the wiles of the devil. So, yeah.
My friend Daniel says, if God makes use of Satan for his own good ends, then evil does not really exist. To which I answered, yes, evil does not have any substance. Evil is not a thing, but a way. That's what St. Augustine said. Evil is not a thing, but a way. Because the Gnostics believed that evil had a substance, and he debunked that using sound philosophical principles. So yeah, the evil is just a parasite on the good. It's just a way of being. It's an orientation. It's not a thing. There is no substance to evil. So yeah, it's just grasping that notion, that metaphysical notion, was very, very, very powerful to me when I was just coming out of Satanism into monotheism and Catholicism. It's very, very powerful when you realize the ontological goodness of everything and that God created a good world. That's a defeated dogma, that God created a good world. It's also a dogma that he could have created a better world. So it's not the best of all possible worlds. And if you read Voltaire's Candide, Voltaire's making fun of that idea, right? That God created the best of all possible worlds. It's a hilarious book. If you haven't read Candide, I recommend you read it. Have you read
I have not, no.
it? It's hilarious. So again, Voltaire was an enemy of Christ and his church, Voltaire, but he dedicated his book, ironically or not, I don't know, but he dedicated his book to the Pope at the time.
Okay.
So there's a sort of I don't know if you noticed with the atheists, but they sort of have a love-hate thing with religion where they they love to hate it. You know what I mean? It's like sort of like an obsession, you know?
Yes.
They cannot ignore God and religion. They can't ignore it.
Yeah. No.
Most of them. The online ones anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it would seem to me like if you were truly just ambivalent about God, you'd be agnostic. But atheists tend to have a certain hatred toward God.
Excuse me one moment.
Yeah.
I'm going to read you what I'm saying here. Okay, so Daniel asked, what is the cause of evil? My answer is the abuse of free will is the cause of every evil. And that abuse of evil is also known as sin. So, I mean, that's just all there is to it. Like we have free will. We can use it properly in a godly way, or we can abuse it or misuse it. And that's always where every evil comes from.
And you can further dumb it down in terms of what is sin. It is disobedience to God.
Yep. We live in a good world that's a fallen world. So I personally, I always say, I think it was inevitable that our first parents would fall. I don't know if they had to fall that same day they were created, but that's I think tradition says they were created in the morning and they fell in the morning, so they didn't even go half a day. Like they didn't even go half a day. Is that right?
See, I asked that question once, and my understanding was that tradition says that they fell on the sixth day. However, it was not necessarily implied that it was the same sixth day, that they fell on a Friday. Just
Okay.
like Jesus was crucified on a Friday.
Was creation on Sunday?
Creation was on the first day of creation, day one was on Sunday. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And by the way, speaking of that, this is a new DVD put out by the Kolbe Center, How the World Was Made in 6 Days, and this is day one. So we'll be putting out, all of the days. So, anyways, if you're interested, if anyone's interested, how the specifics of what day one probably looked like, it's outlined in this DVD, which you can stream or you can purchase a physical DVD.
Amazing. I'll definitely be checking that out.
Yeah,
Excuse me for being, I can't multitask, so I just have to type my answer here. It's just more of the same here. But I'll discuss with Daniel another time. He's been on my podcast a couple times now. So
sure.
I do have to wrap it up. We've done an hour and 10 minutes. I really appreciate you taking the time. Before we wrap up, I do want to give you a chance though to talk about anything that that you didn't get a chance to bring up, like if it's a topic you wanted to mention, or if it's another book or DVD or anything from the Colby Center or anything else that's going on.
Okay.
What else is on your mind?
Sure. So I'll just briefly mention one aspect of this DVD that is something that was brought up in the debate I was recently in that I don't think I did a terrific job of defending, but it's this idea of why or why would Genesis chapter 1 say that the sun, the moon, and the stars were made on the fourth day if light was created on the first day? And so this DVD goes into that, but essentially, probably the best answer that I can give is the opinion of St. John Chrysostom, who said that it was done in that way so that we could see that the sun is a creation and should not be given this pride of place by placing it on the first day, because sun worship is very common around the world and has been historically. And so it's essentially a way of saying God didn't need to make it on the first day. And so the general, most popular idea of how that worked on the first day, according to the church fathers, is that a great light was created that you could say was kind of analogous to the sun, and that it provided the light, and that by the fourth day it was um, dissipated into the rest of the universe. And interestingly, there's a segment on that DVD where I talk about the fact that scientists have examined the amount of light in the universe, and they have found that the light that they have determined is coming from the stars and the sun is not equal to the total amount of light, that it only equates to about half the light. And so they don't know where the rest of this ambient light is even coming from.
Uh,
So it's just one more um, thing we can kind of think about that says we don't understand everything. It certainly is very easy for God to make light. He is light, you can say. And there's plenty of examples in scripture of supernatural light being made. And also in at the end of the Apocalypse of St. John, also known as Revelation, it says that there will be no need for the sun because God provides the light. So in fiat creation, where you're thinking of the creation week as miraculous, it's really nonsensical to try to construct this like perfect naturalistic explanation for things that were clearly supernatural anyways. So that's the burden of trying to do that is purely on the naturalists,
hmm.
not on us who can just say, look, we were told straight up how it happened. Just go ahead and read Genesis.
Yeah, well, this is the famous creation providence framework, right? That's what you how you refer to it
Right.
at the Colby
Yes.
Center. And this is this this stretches back to the fathers, I would imagine, that language.
You know what? That is a good question. I'm not even sure exactly where that idea of the providence framework. I mean that idea is one that definitely goes back to the fathers. 100% yes. That the 6 days of creation, it is not right to think about this as just merely an extension
Right.
of the time that we live in, that it was its own special um, period where these miracles were happening, and that the natural order of things didn't really begin until the seventh day.
Right, right, right. Uh, one quick question before I let you go. You know, since I've become a young Earth creationist because of Saint Maximilian Kolbe indirectly, but because of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, I haven't really been terribly interested in the natural science side. But there's something that's always been in the back of my mind, which is a lot of people take it for granted that human civilizations have been around longer than 10,000 years. Uh, but every historical archaeological TV program that I've ever watched always talks about going back, 7,000 years at the most. They never talk about before that. So I'm just wondering what your perspective is on that. Why are there's sort of a general understanding that they're ancient civilizations when the scientists on the History Channel or the Science Channel, they don't really acknowledge any evidence, any hard evidence for anything before 7,000 years ago. That's the impression I have. Am I wrong? And what's your impression for this idea that civilizations before that?
Yeah, well, generally speaking, you're correct that virtually all archaeological findings have been within at least 10,000 years as determined by carbon dating. And I think that the main reason that the thought is that civilization was before is because it almost has to be if you're going by evolutionary theory. Because why would you have humans that came onto the scene some 200,000 years ago, but then all of a sudden you have civilization only 10,000 years ago? It doesn't really seem to fit very well. So I think it's mainly based upon the theory. But having said that, there are certainly findings that they have discovered of artifacts and whatnot, um, that they do date as older than 10,000 years, which we would dispute because radiometric dating has a lot of inherent assumptions built into it. And even though carbon dating is, in my opinion, the most accurate of the radiometric dating methods. So yeah, I think we can dispute those things. And but you are right. I mean, like in terms of archaeology, in other words, buildings. Um, to my knowledge, there aren't any buildings that were ever dated more than 10,000 years um, before the present age.
And speaking of, I'm going to squeeze another question. Speaking of civilizations, lately I've been thinking about the noble savage, of the Romantics, the noble savage, and the Aboriginal peoples of our continent and Australasia and all these sorts of places. Um, there's a movement now in the progressive West to pay homage. I think a very hypocritical homage to the Aboriginal peoples. Meanwhile, here in Canada, we've got Aboriginal peoples that don't even have access to clean drinking water. So it's very hypocritical, this sort of homage that's being paid now. They do the same thing in Australia and New Zealand. They pay homage with the original languages, talking about this is their land and so on and so forth. It's kind of like a lip service. I think I could be wrong, but I've never suffered from white guilt, but I am plagued recently I'm troubled by the history, the raw deal that the Aboriginal peoples got. And I really want to know what the church said. Was the church standing up for the rights and the dignity of these people? Or were they just to be conquered because they were devil worshippers? What's your perspective from in terms of Catholicism versus the Aboriginals? I know there's a popular movie that was made in the 70s or 80s about the Amazonian peoples and how the church stood up for them and the Pope stood up for them, and some Protestants were dehumanizing them and the church stood up for them. But I really don't know anything about it. I want to be proud of the Catholic position. Do you have any knowledge about where they stand?
Well, I read a book on the evangelization of the natives in America, largely by Father De Smet. And if you can get your hands on that book, send me an email or whatever after I
Yeah.
forget the exact name of it, but it's excellent. And it really does show how this Catholic priest, he went out and he um, just spent his all of his years in America going from tribe to tribe, trying to stand up for the rights of these natives against so much evil perpetrated on them by unfortunately the white colonizers who were largely Protestants. And when it comes down to it, from my perspective, I mean, natives are no different than any other person in the world in terms of they need Jesus, they need the Catholic Church. And so that is the idea of Father de Smet, and that was the idea of the Catholic Church. So we need to bring the truth to these people and help them, and not just conquer them for the sake of pillaging their lands. So I think that there was a lot of evil done by Catholics on the native populations. However, I don't think that we need to apologize for uh, proselytizing people, I guess you could say. I
Ah.
mean, it's that is not something that we need to be ashamed of. We're trying to convert people to the Catholic faith for their salvation. We're not doing it in a violent manner. We're not wanting to um, do something to someone that's going to hurt them. We're trying to do everything we can to save people's souls. So, from that perspective, I think that that was the historical belief of the prelates in the Catholic Church, and hopefully the faithful, and doing things in the best way that they can. But I mean, it is certainly the case that things were done imperfectly, and no one can say that it was done perfectly. That's for darn sure.
Do you think the church will shift its perspective on the whole COVID fiasco of the past couple of years? Are they going to shift their perspective because they were very gung ho about promoting it? Is there does it take time for the church to look back and say we were wrong, or how does that normally work?
It there will have to be a point at which what they did is condemned, because it was just pure evil what the church did in terms of bowing to all these Covidians and becoming, I mean, the church was practically the worst institution of all of the institutions. They were worse than um, almost any other entity than you could imagine when it comes to COVID regulations. The fact that they so willingly incorporated this into the liturgy, even with the masking and the hand sanitizing and stripping the baptismal waters and everything. They haven't even come close to repenting of it. Instead, they are only just basically trying to justify it. So it would seem to me that this will only be rectified in the decades to come, when the church comes back to its senses, and when we get a pope in who's willing to stand up to the evils around us and basically um, call a spade a spade.
Mm. You know, my wife's very violently anti-Catholic, but she loves that rebellious Vegano. She loves him.
Yeah, I like I like Vigano. I think the two best bishops are Athanasius Schneider and Vigano. They're both willing to speak the truth instead of just be cowards and go along to get along.
So, I mean, I'm reluctant to endorse Vigano because I think I heard that he's a sedevacantist or he has sedevacantist leanings. Have you heard that?
I read a lot of what he's written, not everything, and I don't think he's ever officially taken up that stance, but he has probably said things that would could cause one to potentially think something along those lines. But quite frankly, any sane Catholic has to have at least had those thoughts about the Pope. Who honestly, what faithful Catholic would not at least think to himself, is it possible this is an anti-pope?
Yeah. Is it possible he's an antipope?
Certainly, it's possible. Yes, I mean, there's been anti-popes in the
I
past.
know,
Why could
but
there be
wouldn't the church have figured it out by now and said something?
no anti-popes in the past have not always been situations been rectified immediately. Like for instance, in at the time when there was three different people vying to be pope, and all three of these individuals had what later became canonized saints vying for their uh, authenticity. So
But at least
to me,
one of them made it into the history books as the real pope. That's the difference.
you're right. Yes. However, it only was in uh, after the fact, retrospect. At the
Uh,
time, nobody really knew. And so this will be clarified at some point. And that's the problem. We are not bishops, so we don't have the authority to make that assertion definitively. However, I quite frankly don't think it's wrong for us to speculate on the matter, especially when you have the Pope promoting getting rid of anti-sodomy laws, for instance.
okay. When he talked about decriminalizing.
Yes, which he's still talking about. It came out in today in the news. He's still talking about that.
Oh,
So,
oh boy. So if you sat down with the Pope and he said, just let me have it, be honest with me, tell me what you think of me and my stewardship of the flock and these sorts of things. Don't hold back. I can take it. Tell me how you really feel. What would you say to him?
I would say to him, why don't you just resign? Like you clearly are not leading the flock like Saint Peter. You don't seem to have a Catholic view of reality. You don't seem to value holy tradition, and you are persecuting the faithful in the church while you're elevating to higher levels various heretics. So, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And can you please just step down for the sake of all that is good?
Has he placed? And I just want to say as a disclaimer, like I'm not condoning your opinions, and I reserve judgment. Okay, but I mean, I'm also open. You know, I'm also open to the possibility that he is not a good Catholic. I happen to think he is, just because I give him the benefit of the doubt. But I am open-minded also, and I do question a lot of his decisions, a lot of his actions. And that brings me to this controversial guy, Father James Martin. Is that his name?
Yes.
Um, do you have, because I haven't looked into it, but I've certainly heard a lot online. Do you have definitive proof that he thinks that homosexual acts are not a sin? Like, do you have, like, does he come out and say that? Or is he just giving pastoral care to these people because Christ died for them? Or
It's
does,
very clear that he is attempting to change Catholic teaching to make it so that homosexual actions are not a sin. Yes, I mean everything he's doing is attempting to do that, and he's a snake who's doing it in subtle ways.
okay.
But I'm fully convinced that that is exactly what he's doing. Yes.
So he's not just caring for souls and trying to help people to come to Christ and then they can have chastity in their lives. You don't think, have you ever heard him talk about
No,
chastity?
no, I haven't. I mean, if he was caring for their souls, he would tell them the truth that God um, loves you and he wants you to step away from sin. So stop engaging in homosexual actions. This is a grave sin. And if you keep doing it, you will end up in hell. And so you must repent and stop doing this because God loves you and he doesn't want you involved in sin. He wants to save your soul.
What would you say to the counter argument that, well, you're uptight about the homosexuals, but what about the unrepentant masturbators that are going to communion and they're going to confession? They don't even confess masturbation because they don't think it's a sin. What would you say?
100%.
What would you
Yeah,
say?
I would say that that is equally as much of a bad issue. However, the difference is public sin versus non-public sin.
Okay.
People who are habitual masturbators and not repentant for it generally aren't going around bragging about this. And
One of their forearms is just a lot bigger than the other. That's the only
yeah,
clue we have.
exactly. So
I'm kidding. I'm being silly. But but yeah, I mean, I am sympathetic to sinners, especially when it comes to sexual sin, because it's just like it's so easy, so convenient, it's so pleasurable. Any form of sexual sin, whatever you're into, right? And I consider all the most depraved and perverted activities to be just sophisticated forms of masturbation. That's why I kind of put them together. Although I think that the more depraved acts are worse than the sort of traditional solitary masturbation, if it's, there's on a spectrum, right? But I see the wildest, most violent and kinky group stuff, whatever it is, as just a sophisticated form of masturbation, because you're just seeking after a new thrill, something more wild and whatever. It's just like, that's just, it's all the same to me. Sex is good, but the only people having sex are faithful Catholics who are married to someone that's not closely related in a committed, mutual, self-giving relationship, blah, 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 blah. So St. John Paul II talks about sexuality quite a bit. And I haven't read his Theology of the Body, but I've heard very good things about it. Have you read it?
I haven't read it either. No.
Are you interested? Do you think it might be good?
I think it's possible that it has some good things in it. Yes.
You just object to his kissing the Quran.
Yeah, I object to that, and I also object to Assisi, where he
Yeah.
invited all of these various religious figures across the world, and he has a prayer meeting with them, and he opens up the church to Buddhists and puts and allows a idol of Buddha on the altar and allows this blasphemous worship to happen in a Catholic
Yeah.
church, and yet that has not gone publicly repented, and yet this is now he's elevated to a figure of sainthood that we're supposed to um,
Imitate.
imitate. Yes, I mean, to me, that alone, that one act would be enough to say no, we can't elevate this, because then we are um, implicitly um, saying that this version of ecumenism is somehow acceptable and to be imitated.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think about my favorite saint, Saint Augustine, and his sins and his concubine and all that. But of course, we all understand that he put her away and he changed his life, and it was very dramatic, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, there are differences, obviously, but there is that saying that every saint has a past, just as every sinner has a future. So we don't know. We don't know. I like to give the benefit of the doubt, obviously, and I think it is an infallible judgment of the church when they canonize a saint. That's what I've heard. That's what I've read, but I'm not sure. But in any case, I'm not worried about. I'm not worried about it. I'm more worried about my own salvation. That's the main thing.
Yeah, totally. And that infallible question, to me, it is still a question. I mean, there was a book put out by Peter Kwasniewski that is about that topic. I haven't actually read it, but he brings forth a case that such canonizations are not actually necessarily infallible. So I think that would be worth checking into.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to email you, and I'll get you to send me that book about the natives. And
Yeah,
of course, we're always in touch anyway by email. So I do have to let you go now. But it's been a pleasure talking with you again, and I hope you're happy. You're happy in the States there.
yeah, it's going wonderfully. The Lord really allowed this to happen, made it happen, and has been so good to us.
And you have your own practice there with your dentistry?
I am currently associating with another dentist, but it's going very well. Very happy here. We're as busy as we can be, and it's just been a huge blessing.
Amazing. So keep praying for me and mine. And
Yes.
as you know, you and yours are in my prayers. And I'm so grateful I got to meet you and your beautiful family in Montreal here when you came.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. That was
amazing.
really cool.
It is
So,
amazing.
yes.
So, but you know that I was violently thrown out of that same place, right? When I walked in without a vaccine
Okay.
passport.
I didn't know that that's where it
That's
was.
where
I
it
knew.
was.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Wow.
that's a bit of a leaves a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth, and I still go there even though they said I'm not allowed to come back anymore. But I still go there. The first time I went back, I went in disguise, but I realized I can get in without being caught. So I still have a bad taste in my mouth when I see that particular priest who didn't defend me when I was thrown out by the security guard because I was appealing to the priest. And
Hmm.
he told me the next day, I phoned him the next day and he said, well, I said, are you my friend? He said, yeah, of course. I said, because I've known him for years. I said, well, why didn't you help me? He says, oh, I'm just a priest. I have no authority. But this little pipsqueak security guard, he has authority in the Catholic Church, but you,
Right.
priest,
Right.
ultra
Yeah.
Christus, you don't have authority. So I have a bad taste in my mouth because of that,
Yeah.
obviously.
For good reason.
It's not.
I mean, that's why I left the parish that I was in 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 Canada because it was like I can't do this anymore because of the COVID insanity. But if we were still there, I don't think I could have gone back because it left such a bad taste in my mouth. I don't know how
Yeah.
you can go back there. To be honest, I don't think I could do that if I were you.
Well, the reason I can go back is because I had the permission of my bishop to do it. He's the one who told me to go in. I said, I phoned him months before the mandates came into place. When the vaccine was first announced, I said, am I ever going to be turned away from the Catholic Church if I'm unvaxxed? He said, no, never. And then months
Yeah.
later, the mandates came and I got assaulted and no, I didn't get assaulted the first time. I just got turned away. But I phoned him again and I said, I was turned away. You promised me this would never happen. He said, never. He said, that should never happen. Go back. But this time, don't talk to the people at the door. Go and talk to a priest. So that's what I did. I had the permission of my bishop to do that.
Yeah.
But what they said is that they're not under the bishop. Their order and their thing is not under the bishop. That's what they told me.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
that
but I guess my question is, how do you not have enough negative feelings associated with that place now that you would just be like, I don't even want to go back here anymore?
Yeah, well, I mean, for one thing, it was like two security guards and that one priest. And so like I tend to give the benefit of the doubt to everyone else,
Sure.
even if they're
Yeah.
masked to the hilt and rubbing the Purell on their hands or whatever. Like I just
Yeah.
give them the benefit of the doubt. And plus, it's a mystical thing. It's like, you know, it's not about me and my little grievances, and it's not about the petty people that are around me. It's about God and it's about
Yeah.
Christ on the altar and these
Well,
sorts
that's
of
a good
things.
attitude.
Yeah,
That's a very good
but
attitude.
I'm also human, so I have a bit of bitterness.
Right.
For sure, for sure. But it's also good. It's also good to realize that we're in a fallen world. And Saint Augustine said the advantage of all the corruption and stuff in the church is it teaches us to rely on God and God alone, and that's basically what we have to do.
Yes.
So take good care of yourself and your family, and let's keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon. Okay?
Sounds good, David.
Nice
Thank you
talking to you, my brother. God bless you.
thank you for this. God bless you too.
Love you. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.